All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're taking a deep dive into the top global news stories straight from a report on January 3rd, 2025. It's a wild mix of stuff, conflicts heating up, political drama, and even some, well, let's just say unique events. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Always fascinating to see what's grabbing the world's attention.
Well, let's start with a story that's unfortunately become all too familiar, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This report dives into the aftermath of the latest Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. And, well, you can imagine, things are incredibly tense. One quote that really hit me was from a Gaza resident, Hassan Abu Kamar. He said, 2024 was the toughest year of my life. It was also the toughest year in the history of Gaza. The war in 2024 was not just against Gaza, but against all Palestinians.
Powerful statement really captures the profound impact this conflict has on everyday people. And the report goes on to detail the targeting of a hospital in these airstrikes, raises some serious concerns about, well, the proportionality of the response and the potential for civilian casualties.
Yeah, definitely a lot of questions surrounding that. And amidst all the devastation, the political blame game is, unsurprisingly, heating up. The report quotes Hussein Chork, a Middle East political analyst, and he had some pretty strong words for President Biden's handling of the situation. He's basically saying that Biden's approach gave Israel a green light to commit war crimes against Palestinians.
Yeah, Choker's statement reflects a growing concern among some that the U.S.'s unwavering support for Israel might actually be hindering the chances for a peaceful resolution.
Well,
It's a tough situation, a real geopolitical puzzle, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
absolutely. Speaking of complex geopolitical puzzles, let's shift gears over to the ongoing war in Ukraine. This report highlights a truly staggering number, an estimated 430,000 Russian soldiers killed in 2024 alone.
Wow, that number really drives home the brutal reality of this conflict, the sheer scale of the loss. To put it in perspective, that's more than the entire population of many major cities. Raises serious questions about how sustainable Russia's military campaign really is in the long run, and what this level of human cost could mean for, well, potential social and political upheaval within Russia itself.
It's a really sobering thought, a reminder of the human cost of war and the ripple effects that go way beyond the immediate battlefields. But, it's not just the big players on the world stage wrestling for influence. There's a movement gaining traction in Africa that's challenging the old order in a pretty big way. Ever heard of the Frexit movement?
Oh, absolutely. It's a fascinating development, deeply rooted in the complex history of colonialism in Africa. Essentially, it's a call for the removal of French troops from the continent, a rejection of what many see as continued French meddling in African affairs.
And this report highlights Ivory Coast's recent decision to join the movement, which is a pretty significant development, could signal a turning point in the relationship between France and its former colonies.
Right, I think it's crucial to understand the historical context here. France has a long and, well, complicated history in Africa, marked by periods of both cooperation and exploitation. This Frexit movement is a reflection of a deep-seated resentment among some Africans. They feel that France hasn't truly come to terms with its colonial past and continues to exert an outsized influence over their countries.
It's a powerful reminder that the legacy of colonialism still casts a long shadow, and the desire for true self-determination is a force to be reckoned with. Now let's hop over to South Korea, where the political scene is, well, let's say it's getting pretty spicy.
Oh yeah, things are definitely heating up over there.
This report details an attempt to arrest the opposition leader, Yoon Suk-yeol, and it sparked outrage among his supporters, ignited a whole Stop the Steal movement. It's giving us some serious déjà vu echoes of similar movements we've seen in other parts of the world.
It's definitely a concerning development, raises questions about the stability of South Korea's democratic institutions, and the potential for things to get even more polarized. This attempted arrest and the protests that followed highlight a deep distrust in the government and the electoral process. It's coming from a significant portion of the population.
Yeah, it seems like South Korea is at a bit of a crossroads, and it'll be interesting to see where things go from here.
Yeah.
But, political drama isn't just confined to, the traditional political arenas these days. We've even got tech CEOs jumping into the fray.
You're telling me. Speaking of which, it seems Elon Musk has decided to shake things up in UK politics. This report details his very public call for the dissolution of the UK Parliament over a child grooming scandal. As you might expect, it's causing quite a stir.
He didn't hold back, did he? The report mentions him specifically targeting Prime Minister Keir Starmer, even appealing to King Charles to step in. It's certainly not your typical approach to political activism.
It's definitely unique, that's for sure. Musk's actions bring up a lot of questions about, well, the role of these tech leaders in political discourse and the potential for social media platforms to be used to, amplify certain viewpoints or even try to sway public opinion. It's a debate that's likely to only get more intense as the lines between the online world and the real world continue to blur.
And while we're on the topic of, shall we say, colorful figures, we can't forget about former U.S. President Donald Trump. It seems he's managed to find himself in the middle of yet another controversy. This time, it's related to the Panama Canal.
The report is a bit light on the specifics, but it definitely piques your interest, right? Seems there are some unanswered questions about Trump's involvement with the Panama Canal and how it might impact international relations.
It's a classic Trumpian mystery. Just when you think he's faded into the background, he manages to pull himself back into the spotlight. All right, we've covered some pretty heavy stuff so far. Why don't we take a little break from the serious stuff and explore something a bit lighter?
Sounds good to me. A change of pace is always welcome.
This report has a section on some of the more, well, quirky and heartwarming news from around the world. And one story that caught my eye was about the Berlin Zoo finding a unique way to use unsold Christmas trees.
Oh, I love this one. They're feeding the trees to the animals. Apparently, elephants, giraffes, reindeer, they all have a bit of a taste for pine needles.
That's so cute. What a great example of, being resourceful and giving those trees a second life. Speaking of animals, across the pond in London, the zookeepers are busy with their annual stock take.
The great animal census. Always find that fascinating. They have to count every single creature, from the tiniest bug to the biggest mammal. This year's count even includes 2 adorable baby gorillas.
I can only imagine the logistical challenge of trying to count all those animals.
Right. But it's crucial for making sure all the animals under their care are, well, accounted for and doing okay.
So we've gone from the battlefields of Gaza and Ukraine to the political arenas of South Korea and the UK. Even took a fun little detour through the animal kingdoms of Berlin and London. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it?
It certainly has, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Well, get ready for more because we're going even deeper into these stories. We'll explore the wider implications in part 2. But for now, I'm curious, what's standing out to you from everything we've talked about so far?
Welcome back to our deep dive into the top global news, folks. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's always more to uncover. So, ready to dig a little deeper?
Absolutely. Let's unpack some of these stories and see what insights we can find.
Okay, well, let's go back to the Israeli airstrikes in Gaza for a moment. This report really delves into a very troubling aspect, the targeting of a hospital during those strikes. This has drawn a lot of condemnation from human rights groups, and it raises serious questions about potential violations of international law.
It's a huge concern, and the report includes this really harrowing account from a Gaza resident named Hassan Abu Kamar. He talks about living in constant fear, never knowing when the next attack might come. He says, Gaza was just ashes and moans. We were living in caves and under rubble. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of this conflict, the impact on innocent civilians.
Absolutely. And while there are always multiple perspectives in a situation as complex as this, the targeting of a hospital is a serious breach of international norms. It demands further investigation, and it underscores the urgent need for a peaceful resolution. But with the political climate being what it is, finding a path to peace seems incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it feels like we've been saying that for decades, which is heartbreaking. Speaking of seemingly intractable conflicts, the war in Ukraine is still raging on, and this report paints a pretty grim picture of the situation. We talked about the staggering number of Russian soldiers killed in 2024, but it also looks like the conflict is becoming a long and drawn-out affair. Neither side seems capable of achieving a decisive victory.
Right, it's become a war of attrition, and the consequences for both sides are devastating. Ukraine is obviously bearing the brunt of the invasion, but the long-term impact on Russia is significant too. With all those casualties and the economy struggling, it makes you wonder how long Putin can sustain this war effort, without facing internal pressure and potentially instability.
That's the big question, and the ripple effects extend far beyond Ukraine and Russia. We're seeing the impact on global energy markets, supply chains, even the political landscape. Countries all over are scrambling to respond to this new reality.
It really highlights how interconnected our world is. What happens in one corner of the globe can have huge consequences for everyone else.
Absolutely. And speaking of interconnectedness, let's circle back to the Frexit movement in Africa. It's amazing to see how a movement with roots in the history of colonialism is gaining so much traction in the 21st century.
What's really interesting to me is that it's not just about France. The Frexit movement taps into this broader sentiment we're seeing globally. It's a pushback against traditional power structures, a desire for more autonomy and self-determination.
It's like a ripple effect. One nation asserts its independence and inspires others to do the same. And this desire for greater autonomy isn't just limited to Africa. We're seeing a similar struggle play out in South Korea, although in a very different context.
Exactly. The attempted arrest of opposition leader Yoon Suk-yeol and that Stop the Steal movement, they highlight a deep-seated distrust of the government and a longing for change. While the specifics are different from the Frexit movement, the underlying feeling is the same. People want more control over their own destiny.
It's like a global wave of people demanding a greater say in how their lives are governed. Fascinating to watch. And then you have individuals who seem to wield this incredible global influence. People like Elon Musk.
Ah, yes. The tech CEO turned political commentator. His call to dissolve the UK Parliament over that child grooming scandal definitely made headlines. You know, love him or hate him, he certainly knows how to capture the world's attention.
He's a master of using his platform, but his actions raise some important questions. Is it okay for tech CEOs with these huge platforms to weigh in on political issues in other countries? Where's the line between free speech and the potential for undue influence?
Those are questions we need to grapple with as we move further into this digital world. The lines are getting blurrier, and we're still trying to figure out the rules of engagement. And of course, then there's the wild card of Donald Trump lurking in the background.
Always a wild card. Even out of office, he finds a way to stay in the news. This time, it's his involvement with the Panama Canal that's got everyone talking.
It's a bit of a mystery right now. The report doesn't give us much to go on, but it hints at some potentially shady dealings. And knowing Trump, it's hard not to be at least a little intrigued.
I have a feeling this story is going to develop. We'll have to keep our eyes on it. Now, before we get too bogged down in all the political intrigue and controversy, let's take a moment to appreciate some of the lighter news stories.
I'm all for that. A little bit of good news never hurts.
Remember those baby gorillas we talked about? They're actually part of a much bigger story, the London Zoo's annual stocktake. The report describes this massive operation where the zookeepers have to count every single animal in their care.
It's amazing they have to account for everything. Lions, tigers, even tiny insects and fish. It really shows their dedication and the importance of conservation.
It really does. And while we're celebrating the animal kingdom, let's not forget those clever folks at the Berlin Zoo who are turning those unsold Christmas trees into snacks for their animals.
It's a win-win. The animals get a tasty treat and the trees don't go to waste. Great example of creative problem-solving and sustainable practices.
It's a nice reminder that even with all the chaos and conflict in the world, there's still room for ingenuity and a little bit of heartwarming charm.
You know, I think it's important to remember that news isn't always doom and gloom. There are stories of resilience, innovation, and compassion happening every day.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great note to end this part of our deep dive on. In our final part, we'll explore a few more of these lighter stories, and then we'll try to tie everything together, look at the key themes and what we can learn from it all.
Looking forward to that. Always good to step back and see the bigger picture.
Welcome back, everyone, to the final part of our deep dive into those top global news stories from January 3rd, 2025. It's been quite a journey, right? From conflicts and political turmoil to those heartwarming animal stories. But now it's time to, step back and see what we can make of it all, what we can learn from all this information.
I agree. It's always fascinating to look beyond the individual stories. See if we can spot those bigger trends, those themes that are shaping the world.
So as we reflect on everything we've discussed today, what stands out to you?
Well, the thing that really hits me is just how interconnected everything is. From that war in Ukraine affecting energy markets around the world to Elon Musk, wading into UK politics, it's clear that what one nation does, what even one person does, can have these ripple effects across the globe. We're not isolated anymore. Events aren't confined to specific regions or spheres of influence like they used to be.
You're absolutely right. It's a reminder that we can't afford to be, narrow-minded in our thinking. What happens in one part of the world affects us all in some way, and it really underscores the need for global cooperation. We need to understand those complex forces at play, don't we?
Absolutely. And this interconnectedness also shows us the power that individual actions can have. We've seen how one tweet from Elon Musk can spark a huge controversy, or how a grassroots movement like Frexit can gain momentum and challenge the established order. It reminds us that even in a world where powerful institutions and global forces seem to dominate, individuals can still make a difference.
It's empowering, isn't it? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's going on in the world, but it's important to remember that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Absolutely. And another theme that's woven through all our discussions today is that enduring struggle for self-determination, whether it's Palestinians in Gaza fighting for recognition and autonomy, or African nations trying to break free from those colonial legacies, or even citizens in South Korea demanding more accountability from their government. There's this clear desire for people to have more control over their own lives, over their own destinies.
It's a universal human desire, wouldn't you say? To be free to make your own choices, to have a voice in the decisions that affect you, in a world where power is often concentrated in the hands of so few. It's inspiring to see these movements for self-determination emerge, to see people challenging the status quo.
It is inspiring, and while these struggles are often long and difficult, they remind us that the fight for freedom and autonomy is a constant process. It's this ongoing negotiation between the powerful and the powerless.
It's a reminder that history is still being written, and we're all a part of shaping that narrative. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on some of those lighter stories we discussed. They might seem small compared to the bigger issues we've talked about, but I think they offer a valuable perspective too.
I agree. Sometimes we need those reminders that there's still good in the world, even amidst all the chaos and conflict.
Exactly. Those stories about the Berlin Zoo feeding Christmas trees to the animals, and the London Zoo carefully counting every single animal in their care. They might seem like trivia, but they highlight something important, our connection to the natural world, the importance of protecting it, They remind us that there's beauty and wonder all around us. We just have to take the time to notice it.
I think those stories also speak to our innate curiosity, that desire to understand the world around us, whether we're trying to figure out global politics or marveling at the diversity of life on Earth. There's something fundamentally human about seeking knowledge and meaning.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Curiosity, empathy, a global perspective. Those are the things we need to navigate this complex world we live in, and to contribute to a more informed, more engaged society.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the top global news stories of January 3rd, 2025. We've covered a lot, explored a lot of different topics, and hopefully sparked some interesting conversations along the way.
It's been great exploring all this with you.
Likewise, and to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it informative, engaging, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Remember, the world is constantly changing, it's complex, but by staying curious, staying informed, and staying connected, we can all play a part in building a better future. Until next time, stay engaged.